They're slowly trickling in. Hi, everybody. I am Tom Mitchell, Chief Communications Officer, as many of you know. As always with Zoom, we're going to just give people about 90 seconds to get in. It takes a while for everybody to trickle in before we get going. I just want to preface this by saying thanks all for coming. We had a great, just everybody knows, we had a great talk with CJ this morning at President's Council, just a tremendous presentation. I could have been there for another hour, but I had to bail for another meeting, unfortunately. This is the second presentation for our Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee, kind of the keynote so the second of two keynote presentations this academic year. We had one in the fall, and then this is the second one. And with that, let me turn and with me today, obviously, is CJ Gross, but also Dr. Matricia James, Dr. Kimberly DeSimone, the co-chairs of our DEI Commission. And with that, I will turn this over to Kimberly to introduce CJ.
Yeah. First, I want to just thank everyone for taking the time to come. I know it's a busy time of the year. We're wrapping up our semester, and it is really a tribute to your commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion, and the theme of this conversation today about creating a culture of belonging on campus. We so appreciate you being here, and I'm extremely excited to introduce CJ Gross. He is an international organizational development consultant specializing in leadership development, diversity, and inclusion, and he is the CEO of Ascension Worldwide. He has worked with domestic and international leaders from the Fortune 500 companies to nonprofits, government agencies on their diversity and inclusion strategies and initiatives. He's published 3 books. He is a TEDx speaker, a change management leader, and a wonderful human being, and an excellent and entertaining and knowledgeable presenter. So I don't want to take up too much of his time, because I want him to have the time to speak with you and get his message across to you. So thank you so much for being here today, and I'm very excited to hear what you have to say.
Awesome. Thank you, Dr. DeSimone. Thank you, Dr. James. So I just want to say welcome to this really important conversation, the power of belonging. So when you think about belonging, many people kind of think about what is belonging. Quick question, Dr. DeSimone, can people actually type into the chat function or no? Yeah, okay, awesome. So I'll kind of go through this presentation.
I'm just going to interrupt you. I was just going to ask this question.
Yes.
Forgot to give the rules of engagement in terms of the chat.
Okay, what are the rules?
Yes, people can put questions into the chat. I'm sorry for the reverberation.
Okay.
But we will, Matricia or Dr. James and I will take turns bringing those questions to the forefront.
Okay, got it. All right, so awesome. So I'm going to leave a little bit of time, some space in here so we can have these conversations around belonging, because it is the next evolution of the conversation around diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, right? Many people think about this topic and they think about, like, what is belonging, right? So how does it apply? And when I think about belonging, what comes to me is I had an opportunity to speak in Chile last year, 2 years ago. I think it was 2 years, 2 years ago, because remember last year was COVID, right? It's like, who will forget that? And I was in Chile, and I remember thinking to myself, for the very first time, I was in an environment where I was really not comfortable for multiple reasons. And one of the first things was that, in different countries, they kiss different ways, right? And so, or different amount of times they kiss, right? So one of the first things that I remember is that someone reached out to me, and they were from a totally different country. They're from India, and they came up to me and they had a conversation with me. And they said, let me introduce you to this person. Let me tell you what the social norms are here. Let me show you where you can find food and what you can do on your break, and all these different things, and how to put the mic on, because they're going to be translating what you say into a different language. And I was like, wow, that's amazing. And one of the things she said was, I realized that you were the only person that looked like you here. So I wanted to make sure that you felt like you belong. So this is the premise of belonging, right? It is to connect with another person who even might be considered another, or someone who is different, but also to make them feel like they belong, to introduce them to different cultures and different backgrounds. So as we go through this presentation, again, I want you to share some questions if you have them, ideas or thoughts, and they will chime in, because that's most important. So here's my first question. What sparks your curiosity about belonging? So when you think about belonging, what really, comes to mind, or what are you curious about? Is it like many people ask about, well, what is it? Why does it exist? Why is it necessary? And so I'm going to leave that to you. If I see if some things come through the chat, I guess Dr. DeSimone and the rest will share those out. But what I will say is when we think about belonging is really, it's when you put your hand up in the class and you're not quite sure if you have the right answer, or maybe it's a staff meeting, but you put your hand up anyway and someone looks over to you and say yes. And create space for you to share or to ask a question, even if you're not, totally correct.
So CJ, I'll interrupt for a second. A lot of people are commenting on belonging and there's skepticism about inclusion versus belonging and that distinction.
I will talk about it. Great question. So I'll share with you I'm going to share a lot of stories here. So the content is one thing. I want to share a lot of stories. So I worked in the field of diversity and inclusion, right? So that's my background. So one of my first consulting companies that I worked for, they said, this is a place where you can feel like you belong, right? You can be included. And for me, I was like, yeah, companies always say that, but it's never true. So when I came into the interview, I noticed that, people were really relaxed in the company organization. And on the interview, the interviewer asked me, she said, why do you have a tie on? Do you feel comfortable? Do you like wearing ties? And I kind of paused and I thought it was odd. And I felt uncomfortable that this person asked me this question. But then eventually I said, no, I don't really feel comfortable wearing ties. They said, why do you have it on? Because it's a job interview. She says, no, you can be yourself here. And 5 minutes, 6-7 minutes went by, 10 minutes. And then I said, really? I'm just going to take it off. And so as I got the job and as I started working in the company, I realized that this is a place that actually I could be myself, right? So when we think about the difference between, and that kind of cues us up to when we say belonging versus when we mean and when we do belonging, what is the difference? I know we have some things lighting up. Let me get past these 2 slides so I can explain. And I love it if we can have a conversation. That's awesome. So when we think about diversity and inclusion and belonging, all those things, right? I'm going to sum it up as my mentor, Howard Ross would say that, and he shares his quote from Dr. Cole. He says that diversity and inclusion, that whole conversation is very similar to a party. So diversity is being invited to the party. Inclusion is being invited to dance. Belonging is when someone says, would you like to decide which music we want to play? Have you ever been to a party and you've been invited to dance, but it's not your jam? You're like, nah, I don't want to dance. And you don't feel the energy. And as soon as your song comes on, you're like, yeah, let's get into it, right? That's the biggest deal about belonging. It's when you are a part of it and you can be yourself and you're reflected in whether it's the music, it's the school, the curriculum. When you go on a company's website, do you see yourself there, right? So I'll go through these 2 slides. And I'll pause for a moment before I see the chat function lighting up. So inclusion is when you feel welcome, respected, supported, when you are valued, are invited, right? Sometimes it's just being invited to lunch, the basic things, invited to a conversation. The sense of belonging is acceptance, being a part of something that's bigger than you, being a part of it, right? I'll never forget going into college high school, and those football players, they would have those jackets, and because they wore those jackets, you knew they belong to the football team. And whether they were playing or water boys or managers, they were a part of something, and that's a part of being a belonging. They felt understood. There's a feeling of understanding and a feeling that, again, you can be yourself. Let me pause for a moment. I see the chat function lighting up, and I want to see if there's any thoughts there.
Okay, so I'm the vibrations as well, but the first question for you is what is belonging and how is it different for everyone in all different situations?
Okay. Thank you, Dr. James. So one of the things is, so let's say I'm going to use a business, I'll just use a business, or this could be a project. This is what happens a lot of times. So you're different, so that's diversity. So let's say your student board or your faculty invites you into the conversation, right? And so you're different than everyone else that's sitting at the table. So that's already diversity. So we've invited you in. That's inclusion. So you're included. Now, the real question is, and the difference is, do you feel comfortable about sharing your background, your experience, or your opinion when it comes to that particular topic, that initiative? Do you feel like your voice will be heard? And will it be validated, right? One of the things I find, and I just had a conversation with about 23 or 25 millennials in a company that were purchased by another organization. And one of the things that they said was, they don't listen to us. Yes, we get invited to the meetings, but as soon as we raise our hand or share, we get shut down. That is the biggest difference between belonging and inclusion. So you're there, you're included, but belonging is to say that I have a voice and it's respected and I can be myself. I can share with you dissenting viewpoints respectfully and they can be heard and considered. Pause for a moment. Any thoughts or questions or anything else that's coming up? Did I answer that? I love that this is a discussion. I love that. I can't see you. I was going to say, give me a thumbs up, but Dr. James, did that land well?
I think
Yeah. Let me just interject real quick.
Please.
Oh, boy. Is everybody getting feedback? Are you getting Jay?
I'm not. Let me mute real quick.
Are you reverb? Do you have you getting reverb from me? Oh, no.
we were until CJ muted. Now everyone.
Yeah, it seems like when he's talking, we can't. He's got to mute for us to ask those questions. That's helpful.
Okay. So go. Kimberly, you go if you want to stay muted. CJ, Kimberly, you want to ask the next question?
No, I mean, a lot of the conversation has just been about creating that sense of community and how it's different in different situations for people. How do you create a sense of belonging when what is around you doesn't promote an inclusive environment? So there's some expression of people, and I think it's great, honest expression from some of the panelists and participants saying, you know, there's a lot of feeling where I don't feel I belong and I don't feel included. And you know, what do I do about that?
Another CJ point that I see in here is kind of asking about perception. Is it you feeling like you belong, or is it the group you're in wanting you to feel like you belong? So how much of it is self-perception versus objectivity?
These are some awesome questions, first of all. And I thank you so much for that. So yeah, let's kind of dive into that. So the belonging feeling is elusive because it is all about how you feel. So I may have an organization, or I may have a club on campus, or a study group, or whatever it is, and I want you to belong. So I do things to try to make you feel belong, but I don't really know you yet. And because I don't know you, I do things, and I may say things that seem exclusive, but to me, I'm thinking, oh, I'm trying to make you feel belonging. That's really inclusion. Belonging is when you feel like they get you and you don't have to explain a lot, right? So there's almost this, I don't even have to say it. I don't even have to talk about it. And this is the challenging part about belonging, because people that feel belonging usually feel belonging when they're in groups that are similar to their background and their experience. But to have diversity, these are the challenges when you bring in diversity and try to create belonging. I'm going to share some strategies for that, but that's the biggest part of it. I'm also going to share some strategies about when you don't feel belong, and you're in an environment when you don't feel belonging, what do you do? I'm going to share some strategies. So I'm going to ask a question, and then I'll pause for someone to read what's going on in the chat. So when was the first time you remember feeling excluded or that you didn't belong? And what I'd like you to do is consider going way back. I'm not talking about pre-COVID back. I'm talking about further than that. I'm talking about as far as you can remember. When I have executives that do this, 50, 60 years old, they go back to the playground. They go back to swing sets. They go back to dodgeball. So let me pause, and I know it's probably going to light up. I'll ask that question, and I'll go on mute and see what else is coming through the chat.
So CJ, while everyone's typing in, I just was brought back to the playground, as you mentioned. So I am half Puerto Rican. My father is from Puerto Rico, but I don't speak Spanish. And I grew up in a very predominantly Hispanic neighborhood. And I remember when I would talk to people and say that I was Hispanic, people would say, "Do you speak it?" And I would say no. And they would say, "Then you're not Puerto Rican." And I actually, for many years, did not say I was Puerto Rican anymore, because I felt like I was being a poser somehow. And so that's my experience. I just read in here someone else's experience, in elementary school, asked to sing Christmas songs, and they're Jewish. And that's an example. Parents divorcing, and everyone knew it, so it felt like maybe they were seen as being different in that way. Um, Being one of our former Buffalo Bill saying that when he was playing Little League football in the suburbs, one of two Black kids on an all-white team. So these are some of the things that are coming through. We've got religion, we've got race, we've got identity, a lot of these divorce versus the traditional family model, all of these things coming up.
Wow, that's all I'll say. I want to make sure I consider time, because I have a story about that. I was delivering a training for someone I think it was in the Midwest. I can't remember. And I think Dr. DeSimone, I had acquired a property in Puerto Rico and had a property manager. And I came back into this to the training that I was delivering, and it was a young lady who identified as being Latinx. And I went right up to her because I was having a challenge speaking Spanish. And I went right up to her and I said, and if you've gone through the training for a fast brain versus slow brain, I went right up to her. I was in my fast brain and I said, "Could you please translate for me?" And she looked at me with this look, this bewildered look, like, "Are you kidding me? Again?" Now, I couldn't see that because I was in my fast brain. I'm thinking, hey, you can help me out. This is probably, this is a good thing for us both, right? She said, after about 3 seconds, because that's when it gets weird, she said, "I don't speak Spanish." And now here I am as the diversity and inclusion consultant. I have made a huge, great mistake. And it was up to me to make that right. But I can tell you that although we try to make inclusive behavior, we try to make people feel comfortable, sometimes we make mistakes, and it creates a sense of pushing people out. So here's what I'd like you to, as you consider the question: when have you done something that you were not proud of? And you don't have to put it all in there, you can just, generally say, to fit in, because when we don't feel belonging, we do things to fit in. We speak maybe with an accent, right? I had a friend the other day that said he didn't know where he fit in because he went to a predominantly white school, and he was an African American. He's pretty dark skin, and he said when he went to the HBCU, he tried to talk with an accent. He thought that was what he was supposed to do, but he was brought up speaking in a different way. And he says, "I'm not proud of it now, but it's something that I did to fit in." Again, he was included, but belonging is totally different, right? And it's a deeper feeling. So consider, I'll just pause because I know there's so many things happening in the chat. Also, statistics show that the first time someone does something like steal a car, does drugs or something, it's primarily because of peer pressure, and they're with someone. So the first time we do things are usually because we want to feel a sense of belonging. And sometimes it's not a bad thing. It's maybe, hey, I wanted to go to college because someone else was going to college. I wanted to go to, say, Bonaventure University because someone else was going there. That's a good thing. So we're talking about some of the things that we do. Use the restroom while the main manager was speaking, because she wanted to let him know that she respected him. Now everyone else was using the restroom. This is the difference between inclusion and belonging. I'm here, but I don't feel comfortable. Let me pause for a moment as we switch slides and what else.
Okay, so far I see one new entry that says dumb myself down to fit in.
I've heard that. I've heard people. I mean, tons of times people have said, I'm a part of this group, but I don't want to, I don't want to be excluded. So I'm not going to say certain words. I'm going to use certain words. I've heard people say that they won't even tell people their GPA. It's like, are you kidding me? Me? I mean, on the other hand, I couldn't wait. I was probably on the other side of that though as well. So what's that?
One more. Changing my clothing style. Another said, shunned a friend who wasn't as popular so I could hang out with other kids.
So as you think about these, please write them down for your own benefit. But now, when I ask these questions, I go all the way up to the level, all the way up the ranks of an organization. So these are people sitting at the C-suite level. Some of them are millionaires, a couple of them billionaires, and they say, "Here's the time where I felt excluded. And here's how painful it was." And I would have people, at least two people that I can remember, literally weep when they would talk about being excluded. One gentleman who had been bullied by someone playing dodgeball, right? The only reason they included him was because so that they can hit the ball, throw the ball at him. And he was, at the time, he was a professor. He had his doctorate degree, all those things. So when we have these experiences, they perpetuate on through other experiences. And we want to really be aware of this, because there's hurt and pain that goes under these experiences that we then perpetuate through, our experiences, mentorship. Even when we have kids, they flow over into our other relationships. And then when we are included with the best of intentions, now we're like pulling back because I'm not sure, and it requires more belonging. No longer can we just be supported by inclusion. So, what do those experiences do to your performance? I want you to think about that. I'm going to pause for a moment as you answer that question. Someone can read what's coming in the chat. So when we say performance, I'm saying consider work and consider school performance when you feel like you don't belong.
And here, I'll jump in again until we get some questions in. But I think that when people don't feel they belong, they're less likely to share ideas. So if I'm in a meeting where I feel like, the proverbial eye roll, like, oh, here we go. If you feel like people are like, oh, you're going to bring whatever kind of perspective or whatever, I'm likely to maybe, it's like putting the light under a bush type of situation. Other people are saying, I don't feel like I belong when I'm greeted with silence in response to an idea I've put forward. I think that's really interesting. And I think we've all probably felt that before. It makes you doubt yourself, and that it makes you feel like you can stifle an institution or be stifled in the institution. People don't do things because they're always worried about fitting in, right? So it's exhausting, and it takes away the energy. Some people are alluding to a certain amount of emotional exhaustion and spiritual exhaustion that comes with constantly having to feel like you fit in. And so that distracts you. And people saying that when they're not included, they feel that their experiences and viewpoints are not any longer valued. And I really hate to not include someone's comments on this, especially ironically. So if I've missed your comment, please don't think that I am not making that what you're saying doesn't belong. If you don't feel like you belong, you don't speak up. When I'm not included, I feel like my viewpoints aren't valued. Imposter syndrome, that we feel that way. Not belonging in one place overflows into the other. So you start to feel that in other relationships. You have fear. The fear of being excluded. You're at odds with everyone and learn not to trust people. Underperform because of anxiety. That not belonging is debilitating. And I have to tell you, what's really nice about this, we're getting a lot of students engaged in this too. When I feel I don't belong, I am closed off and only work my required hours, right? So that not giving that extra bit, not being motivated to do that extra, go the extra mile.
One other one that I saw was that I thought was important, that one person said that when they don't feel like they don't belong, they begin to doubt themselves. Then, of course, if you doubt yourself, all those other things come into play where you don't engage as much. You're too busy worried about fitting in than actually maximizing your performance. So I think that's important. It becomes a reflection, a self-reflection versus understanding that it's external.
Woo! That's good stuff. All right, that's good stuff. So we all are feeling this, right? At a visceral level, there's lots of research that have been done on these experiences and how it changes literally our physiological makeup, right? What I wrote down was I read a study once that said the average employee, right? So you flip that and look at it in terms of being a student, right? The average employee, you can only get 80% out of the average employee of performance. But they found that when people feel like they belong, that you can get 125% out of them. I'm going to say I'd like to make sure people feel belonging because I can get more out of them. They've also found that, and I saw this the other night. Now, this was on a documentary, so, but they said that when you tell a child that he or she is when that person experiences affirmation from their teachers, that their test scores, I get so excited, their test scores increase dramatically. It's not surprising, right? When someone says you did a great job versus like, okay, so I'm really looking for another C from you, right? Because that's what I expect, right? So these things happen without our awareness, without intention, without control. So I know we have some things in the chat function. I'm gonna go through this and talk a little bit about this because this is super, super important. So, and this kind of like really helps us understand where we are where we were, years and years ago and where we are now. So, if you're not familiar with this is the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And in Maslow's framework, in his framework of needs in 1943, he wrote a paper, The Theory of Human Motivation. He says that we are motivated primarily based on our this chart right here, so which is our physiological needs and our safety, our security, then belonging, love and belonging, then self-esteem, feeling good about ourselves, and then ultimately self-actualization, where we can achieve our best goals. So this kind of flows into whether we perform well in school, whether we perform well in our job, whether we perform well in a relationship. Now, this was in 1943. So Howard Ross, who is the author of Our Search for Belonging is Tearing Us Apart, he's my mentor. He says that Maslow has it wrong. He believes that our primary need is actually not safety and not our physiological needs, but the need to belong, the need to be loved. And we see this in multiple ways in our society. We see it when I mentioned to you earlier, the young executive didn't raise her hand or didn't take a bio break, right? That can be really challenging. She didn't even take a bio break just so she can fit in and belong. We see this, and again, nothing against, I have most of my friends are in sororities or fraternities, but we see this in sororities and fraternities as well, right? The need to belong. We go through different pain, right? And obviously there's no pain, no pleasure, but the point of it all is it true that those are the first needs when there are so many things that we do to fit in that go against physical safety? If you've been a kid before and someone says, I dare you to do it, and you want to fit in, you go do it, right? So these are things that we want to be aware of. And we also want to understand that, and this is so important, and this really probably just confirms what everyone is saying, that in our brain, the area that is triggered when we think about actual pain is the same part of our brain that lights up and that's engaged when we have physical pain. So your brain doesn't know the difference. So when you're being excluded, it's like a physical pain. It is a physiological response that we have. We sometimes physically get sick. It's called homesick in some cases, right? So there's a lot of things that happen on the physiological level that when we're not feeling included, we find challenge. And so what are your thoughts about the cost? What are the costs? And I'm very interested to hear this from a perspective of academia, from students, from teachers, and from faculty. So what do you think the cost is of exclusionary behavior? And I'll go back into mute and see what's coming through the chat. Where's my mute?
Okay, I'll jump in real quick. I want to just go back a second to a comment that was made by a person who's a person in the attendance who said something about internalizing not belonging. And I think you talked earlier today when you presented in a previous presentation about how people it can almost make you physically sick and so forth. So there's the health part of it, productivity, innovation, low productivity, turnover, less productive, missed opportunities, persistence is reduced, less willing to take risks. And I do encourage students to jump in because I know that when you don't feel you belong, there's probably a consequences you feel. So, oh, this was a great one. Thinking it's normal, the kind of normalization of the environment, levels of motivation. There is workplace exclusion. Work to rule when there's workplace exclusion, not recognizing the harm it does. Yeah, normalization, not recognizing the harm it does, internalizing, anxiety, depression, withdrawal, low morale, overall low morale. Others who are not, this is interesting, that even others who see, if let's say you don't feel excluded, but you see others, that can even be negative on your own personal morale, withdrawal, depression, all those types of things are coming up, which I really think punctuate your point of, when we talk about safety and security and so forth, it does seem like there's a lot of overlap between belonging and having that sense of security and so forth. So.
Absolutely. Thank you, Dr. DeSimone. So lots of great information that came through the chat there. One of the things, if I remember, something came through I just wanted to point out, and maybe I just lost it, but yeah, now I just
Depression, exhaustion, withdrawal, anxiety. Sorry if I got you off track. Low morale of others.
Yeah, it'll come back to me. No
normalizing.
Worries. Oh, that's what it was. See?
Yeah, see, I knew I'd get there. Normalization.
Yeah, you were persistent. You were like, I will get it.
Yeah, that's right.
Right. That's inclusion. That's what it requires to go from conclusion to belonging, making sure that that information was shared. Okay, so let me get to it before I forget. So the other day, again, this was what, yesterday or the day before yesterday, I was working with 20 something odd millennials working for a company, right? So these have already graduated college. Some of them for their first jobs. One of the things that they said was, and this was very sad, and the person really wept when they found this out. This one young lady had been working so hard because she didn't feel like she belonged. And until we had the group conversation about belonging and other people started to share their experiences, she said, OMG. She didn't really say that, but she said, oh my goodness, I thought that this was just the norm. And tears started to come down her eyes because right then and there, she crossed over from being included to belonging. She felt embraced and that her problems mattered and that she was not alone. That's why they have these support groups. That's why they do all these other ways of mitigating these experiences and these feelings. And when she found that that was the case, she shared more because someone was there to support her. And as the consultant, we took that information and we said, we're going to bring that up to leadership, but in a way that helps them understand the impact of that. So,
CJ, we can't hear you.
CJ, we lost you. Oh boy.
CJ, I'm going to text him. CJ? No. We can't hear you.
That's what happened.
We missed about 2 slides there. And I was texting you, but I know you're not looking at your text because you're in here. So you look quite exuberant in your delivery.
Okay, so did you hear about the Forbes article?
No.
Okay, so this comes from, so sorry. This comes from a Forbes article entitled, Belonging in the Workplace is Essential. And it highlights research from a company called Better Up. And it says that employees with a high sense of belonging take about 75% less sick days than the employees who feel excluded. These sick days are equivalent to about $2.5 million in lost revenue per 1,000 employees. Which, if you translate, what I was saying was, if you translate that into the college campus, what is the effect, right? So when college students don't perform well, eventually they could be suspended. And if they're leaving school, like, yes, there's more debt that they have to pay, but also the college is missing out, right? So there's a lot that goes into this. And another one was excluded employees have 50% higher rate of turnover than employees who feel belong, and again, costing $10 million per annual 10,000 employees. So I want you to think about this. My daughter just called me today and said she got accepted to a school. And one of the things that she said was, I'm sorry, I have 2 daughters, not that daughter, the other one. She goes to a school, I won't disclose that school. And she says, I just don't feel like I belong there. I'm going to go to another school, because she lists all these things, a litany of things that made her feel like she didn't belong and that they didn't care. So you think about that school, she really likes the school in general, but the school is losing out on a really good student, right? And they're already challenged with bringing in minorities, but minorities are leaving because it's not a place of belonging there. So the last piece of information here says that employees experience a 65% increase in job performance. We've already talked about that earlier, when they have a sense of belonging, resulting into a $52 million per year per employee response, right? So those are the things that we want to consider. So think about this, and I'm going to pause and see what comes to the chat. But what I'd like you to do is, we didn't have an opportunity to do this in a poll, but I think it's so fascinating when people, and especially at the corporate level, respond to this. You know, in the last 90 days, how many times have you experienced exclusionary behavior, right? And whether that's, it could have been outside of school, could have been at the grocery store, could have been in your community. And so I'll just leave it there. I won't give you the numbers, and we'll see what kind of comes through there. So we'll pause.
Okay, comments are coming in. So one person said at least 5 times in the last 90 days. Someone wants to know if their wife counts. Wife ignoring them. Another person, 3 times, 5 to 10 times. 3 to 4 times. It seems like most folks have experienced it at least a little bit, to know what that feels like.
Sure, and that's only in the last 90 days. So if you
Right, and one person says pretty much most of the time, and it says we have been excluding each other, necessary but heartbreaking due to the virus. So the coronavirus has really changed the whole social setting. So isolation leads to the feeling of exclusion, and many times, far too many times, but it's only been when I am at school. Speaks to what we're doing now in the process of trying to change that culture, so that we would hope those times are the number of times that you feel excluded on campus or at school diminishes, and that there's a strong sense of belonging that overtakes the campus. It's the process, and we hope that this is the beginning of positive movement. Another one says daily. Let's see, so we are appreciating your honesty. I see Dr. DeSimone talking about bravery. We talked about that earlier today. So thanks for being brave and sharing.
Yes, absolutely. And that's what it requires to change a culture, is to be brave. Without being brave, nothing happens. Now, obviously, you can't stay in some cultures that are totally toxic for you and your personal well-being. But the point is that we all experience some level of exclusion. The closer it is to our personal environment and our experiences, so if it's on campus or if it's in your dorm or if it's with your colleagues, I don't know what to tell you about your partner. If it's your partner, your spouse, I don't know what to tell you about that. But outside of that, these have ripple effects. And the effects are very challenging. So what I'd like to do now, I like to keep the conversation going, but I like to talk about some strategies. How can we start to mitigate these experiences? And some of them I may get pushback on, because sometimes it requires people who are being excluded to create the space for themselves. And we're going to talk about allyship, and we're going to talk about some other things. So I just wanted to warn you there. I'll go through two and then I'll pause. So the first one is being curious, right? So if we're people in leadership, we're people managers, we're leading groups on campus, we're in our study groups, and we're creating experiences. Curiosity, well, they say curiosity kill the cat, but outside of that, curiosity is a good thing. And what I'm going to mention is, the other day talking to the group of millennials, right? And they identified as millennials, not just calling them millennials. One of the things is they hadn't had opportunities just to build connections. And there were two companies that had merged. And in that, there was one person, there was multiple people who identified as those people from the other company. So I asked this one gentleman, and he was a young guy, and I said, "Oh, I noticed in your background you have a guitar. Do you play the guitar?" He said, "Oh yeah, I play the guitar. I'm just picking it up." And I played, it wasn't good at it, but I tried to play the guitar. Immediate connection there, right? And all of a sudden I said, "Well, tell me how you're feeling about this transition." And he goes all into it. He said he was introverted. And because he was introverted, that was an exclusionary, because most companies are designed for extrovert. I know that's going to light up a lot there. He said, outside of that, he says, no one ever asked me about my personal life. No one ever asked me about who I was and what I could bring to the table. They just knew I was from another company. So being curious helps a lot to diffuse some of the negative thinking on both sides. Someone mentioned in there, we're both being exclusionary, especially during COVID, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But yeah, so we want to make sure that we're curious of other people, and especially people who are different than us. And it may be even people that are, creating exclusionary behavior because they have the unconscious bias, right? So we don't have time to really get into that, but that also exists. Now, this is really important. And I can't wait to hear your response to this. So check my time. So bridging and bonding is a social capital concept. And if you haven't heard of it, type it, look it up, watch a YouTube video or a TED Talk on it. Now, most of what we do in our society is bonding. Bonding is when you build a relationship with people who are similar to you. And it feels good. When I say it feels good, I mean, literally, it's a physiological shift in your body. You get a dopamine shot when someone says, "Oh, you play golf? I play golf. Oh, you're in social science? I'm in social science." Whatever it is, right? That you have some similarity makes you feel good, like physically makes you feel good. Now, that's really great. Nothing wrong with that. However, it impedes our ability to create different processes, different solutions, because we're all similar, thinking in the same way. But the problem with it is that it is hard to do. It makes us physically uncomfortable when we get into conversations that are opposing to our core beliefs. For example, someone mentioned doing something that was more so geared towards Christianity, and understanding that person was not Christian. And so to the core, that person may have felt like they don't understand me. But that's when you have to do what we call bridging. So bonding is when you have an experience that's similar to someone else, and it's like, yeah, you're going to you've had a travel abroad experience. I've had a travel abroad experience. This is my year to graduate. This is your year to graduate. But when it's opposite, there becomes challenges. So bridging is when you build relationships across differences, across silos, across race, across political viewpoints, across gender differences, sexual orientation. And that can be challenging, because when people start talking about their values and the ones that they hold tight to, it can be very challenging to have them see something different or for us to see their perspective. And it's required in order for us to create an inclusive environment in the workplace and on campus, as well as in our personal groups. And if we ever want to get to belonging, it is so critical and necessary. So you want to start thinking about who are the people that we bond with? I mean, this is a great exercise to do outside of this presentation. Write down all the people that you bond with and see how similar you are with them. Now, write down all the people that you bridge with and consider, when I say bridge, not only are they different, but you have to do extra work to connect with them. Oh, that's hard to do, right? So you want to consider that, and how does that show up in your school life, in your work life, in your personal life? So I'm gonna pause and see what comes up.
And here again, CJ, while people are typing some thoughts in, maybe I can talk about this a little bit. I'm going to take a different approach. I think parenting, as a parent, there's a lot of this bonding over similarities, right? So if your kid plays hockey, then they hang around with the kids who play hockey. And if your kid is in band, then they hang around with the kids who are in band. And if your kid plays football or whatever it is, chess club, it doesn't matter. And so I have a child with special needs, and he doesn't do any of those things. And I, as a parent, never bond with other parents about my child's, he doesn't do a lot of the typical things, I would say. And I saw a meme the other day that made me think about what you were saying here. And it said, imagine getting a call from another mom before a typical kid birthday party, asking how they could make it possible for your child to be included and have it be fun for them. And I thought, wow, I've never gotten that call where someone said, well, because people have the party that's fun for their kids and the kinds of kids their kids play with, but nobody's ever said, or what would it be like for somebody to say, what would be fun for your child or make them feel like they could be there? And I thought that really, to me, is about inclusion. So that's myself. Another person on is saying, inviting people from other countries into our home.
I'm sorry, could we pause for one moment?
Yeah. Dr.
DeSimone, I just don't want that to just go away. That what you just said is very powerful, and it is the difference from, it's not, there's a difference between belonging and inclusion. I wanted to pick that, kind of highlight that. So inclusion is saying, hey, would you like your kid to come over and play with everyone else, or, and then you figure out the accommodations. Belonging is to say, what will it take? What's required to make your child feel comfortable and give them the ability to have a good time as well? Just wanted to spotlight that, because again, we're talking about the differences from inclusion to belonging. So I'll go ahead and pause.
Yeah, feel free to use that example in your next time you present. 2 comments, like I said, inviting people in from other countries into our home. And I know you've talked about that before, and I think that's really important. And then what's the best way to get to bridge with people who have such differing views was another question.
All right, awesome. So the best way, let me see if we're dealing with it. What's the next one here? I think we are covering it here. Well, this is kind of it. So emotional intelligence, what is it? So the best way to, I'm sorry, repeat the question one more time quickly. Sorry.
Let me just unmute, sorry. What's the best way to get to bridge when you're so different than other people?
So what the reality is that we're not as different as we think we are. And I'm going to say that and share a quick story. So I grew up I'm sorry, I didn't grow up. I live right now in a rural part of Pennsylvania. And my neighbors they look different than me. They're younger. All of them have kids. My kids are older and gone. We sit on 2 different sides of the aisle from a political perspective. And when I say 2, I mean like very far apart, right? But the reality is that we lean into discomfort and uncomfortable conversations. And what that does is it requires for us to be uncomfortable a little bit, right? So we had a conversation the other day, and the guy said to me, and he didn't know what was happening. And he said to another guy, we were smoking cigars, right? And we were sitting out, and guy says, yeah, well, what about not stock cars? He was talking about NASCAR. And when he started talking about NASCAR, first it was a dialogue between 3 people. And when we started talking about NASCAR, he started doing this. And it's like he just started having the conversation with the other guy. And I wanted to pick with him a little bit. And I said, I can't like, I don't like NASCAR. And he goes, oh, I'm so sorry. We have that uncomfortable conversation. That's that. And now I can do it because I've been doing it a long time. And I kind of can have those uncomfortable conversations that make them funny. But then undertone is that I am excluding you, and because I don't want to make you feel uncomfortable when we're talking about something that you don't know about. However, I'm going to make you feel even more uncomfortable because now I'm excluding you. Although the intentions are good, but the behavior and the what actually happens behind it is more challenging. So honestly, you have to have this emotional intelligence that allow you to be in that midst of having difficult conversations. And sometimes you're calling people out, right? And it's just like, hey, that's not that's not appreciative. And you know what? Hey, we didn't have this other person to have a chance to talk, and this person's a millennial, or they're the only person of color, or the only woman, or the only student, or the only whatever it is. You have to sometimes call these situations out, but also stay in the room and allow two different perspectives to exist. It requires emotional intelligence and social intelligence in order to do that. I'm going to do one more. So creating inclusive communities. One of the things that I found to be best is to create an environment for yourself where you are, for people like you to feel included. Now, if, let's say, for example, you're on campus and you come from minority, or if you come from a immigrant household, and you start an actual group for people who are immigrants, or people who are women in science, or whatever the background is. So then you create community because you need that belonging. Now, here's the power behind that. You then can give another person an opportunity who does not understand your perspective to be able to sit into that, so that they can understand, for those who want to. And then you can partner with other organizations on campus or from a professional perspective to present at each other's groups so they can hear what are the challenges. So you can now broker. So you cannot just do it you don't have to just do it on a small, on an individual level. You can do it on a somewhat macro level when you start looking at what are the other organizations who are totally different than us. Why don't we have something together? Why don't we get together and do something where we share information and we'll find things out about one another that we didn't know? Yes, we have to broker those conversations. When I say broker, I mean we have to manage those conversations. Some of those are heated, some of those are challenging, so we want to consider. One of the schools that I was working with today earlier said that they're having a challenge with the conceal, non-conceal, if you're familiar with it, in states where you can carry handguns, and it's beginning to be very heated. And I said, well, why wouldn't you just go to one of their rallies? Why wouldn't you just sit in there and try to understand? It's like, never thought about that. Because we think in opposing, but in order to really create change and shifts here, we actually have to lean into some of these uncomfortable conversations and hold space for the other side, which is challenging. I'm going to finish up, and because I'm looking at time, and then we're going to go to the chat function, if you don't mind. So think about making decisions. When we make decisions individually, think about decisions you make when you start to choose roommates, when you go to lunch with someone, which clubs that you belong to, who do you connect with on Zoom or pre-Zoom. These are all things that require us to, if we really want to create an inclusive environment and eventually get to belonging, we have to think about the decisions that we make, not just the other side or whoever's opposing, but how do our decisions affect our ability to connect to one another. What I've heard, not always, but what I've heard people say that their college experience is the first time they met someone who was different than them. Now, had they chose their roommate, they wouldn't have chose that person. But because they did, now they have another experience to pull from. So it's powerful when we choose to connect and to communicate with people who are different than us. Mentorship has been, we don't even have time to get into mentorship. Mentorship has been so beneficial to myself and to others who come from different backgrounds, different experiences, and having a variety of mentors, people who look like you and talk like you and act like you, and people who do that, who make you feel comfortable. But the mere nature of that mentorship conversation and experience is of learning. And that's on both sides. It's not just the mentee is learning from the mentor. And so allyship, I want to talk about that because it's so important. If you're in a position to do allyship, It's important. It's so important because when you are in a position of power, and that could be in your job, it could be on campus, it could be in a project, it could be in the classroom. And here's my experience. My very first time that I went back to school, I had a really horrible experience. My teacher kicked me out and berated me in front of all of the students, and I felt horrible. And I came back the next Saturday. It was like a Saturday class, and the teacher continued to berate me. And I was thinking, I'm going to drop out. And then slowly but surely, the students came to my aid and started to say, hey, listen, this guy is coming to class, you're bothering him. And they kind of like talked to the teacher, and it was a phenomenal experience. But what it did for me in terms of my trajectory in education in my career was the bigger part of it. Not only did I stay in this class, I was literally at the end of the class, I had the highest grade. That gave me motivation and inspiration to continue to go on, right? And he apologized eventually. So when you are in a position of power, and then also someone said, I'll tutor you, you're kind of unorthodox, but I'll tutor you. So what did that do for not just about my self-esteem, but my education, my career, and those who I've been able to affect beyond that? So there's so much power in allyship. So if you're in a position to be an ally, please take advantage of that. So let me pause. I saw the chat function lighten up. So let me pause and see what's coming through.
There were quite a few interesting comments, and one of them was from one of our professors, and he brings up a very valid and I think good point, especially for us since we're trying to shift our culture. And he talks about how about creating a curriculum that does a lot of these things, and how about a foreign language competency? And in many ways, we're a little bit behind because a lot of universities require foreign language coming in, and they even require a certain number of foreign language. I was kind of surprised that we didn't have a foreign language requirement. Even for many of the business schools have it, we don't. And I think we had a student just a minute ago talk about not feeling a sense of belonging. And I think it has to start at the core. And some of it is it's university wide, maybe structure or I'm gonna say guidelines, but it also starts with each individual faculty member in the classroom, because regardless of what the university mandates, the way it's executed really has a great impact on belonging. So I think it takes, I don't want to call it training, but I think educating all of us who are in the classroom on what belonging really means and how to create that regardless of what the content of the course is. So regardless of whether we're teaching cultural literacy or foreign language or finance, we need to find a way to create belonging and an open space for people to feel free to express. But I think it does start with, it starts at the top, which is why we are trying to start with the inclusive leadership that CJ talked about earlier this morning. It starts at the top with putting things in place that communicate that in black and white, what is acceptable and what is expected. So having a curriculum that is multicultural by design, I think is a very valid point, that, and it's something we can all begin to work on as we think about moving forward. We've already talked about what does the new normal look like after COVID. Well, could be a part of the new normal after COVID.
Dr. James, real quick, I have a quick question before you go on. Two things. One, has your organization, has the college done a assessment of that specific, like, could call belonging, inclusion, diversity, inclusion assessment for the students? Because if we reverse engineer it, there are probably some opportunities there from a structural perspective that we can take into account. That's my first question. And I am going to say, because I am a part of the Strategic Leadership Master's Program, 2021, yeah. I have felt extremely included, so much to the degree that I tell everyone, I'm like, well, I have friends there, I'm connected, I got mentorship. And so it does matter how it's executed, because everyone's going to have a different experience. So I'm going to pause there and see what else comes up.
So to answer your first question about surveys, there have been multiple climate surveys, and we've talked about, do they really, what are they asking? We asking the right questions? But one thing that we got without a survey is a student who was no longer here giving us an honest, unfiltered perspective from her point of view. That was one student's point of view, but it did bring to our conscious things that we really need to address. And I am glad that you are having a wonderful experience. And I think some of the students you see in the chat are undergraduate students. And so the experience of the undergraduate students in a day, like living on campus, the whole, we are a residential campus, so a lot of that goes into that too. So I think we need to start there and create the same environment on our undergraduate level as we do in many, many, many of our graduate level classes.
I want to recognize that we're right at time. I'm going to hang out here in case there's more conversation, but I do want to just go ahead and share this quote here that's very powerful when it comes to belonging by Brene Brown. If you don't know her, Google her. It says that true belonging is being valued and getting comfortable, getting comfortable and presenting, being present without sacrifice of who you are. Hopefully I read that right, but I think it's important that we just consider that. Where do we feel, how do we make sure that that our students are feeling comfortable who they are? And it's going to take a little bit of time. So let me just encourage you and say that I always tell people that diversity and inclusion initiatives are not like turn on a dime. Very similar to large cruise liners in the ocean. It takes about 2 miles for them to turn around. So when a company starts their diversity and inclusion initiatives, I tell them and give it 18 to 24 months because it takes time. It takes time for this to kind of seep in. And this is just the beginning of the process. So I'm excited for what you're doing. And I'd love to hear more about it. So I'll pause and I'll say thank you. But if anybody wants to continue the conversation, I'm going to hang out.
I wanted to comment on there's a comment in there about having students spend some time abroad. And I think that is critical. And I think that was missing. That's one of the things that I implemented was a Dean's Global Scholars. And we don't take them away for 6 months, but we take them and we immerse them for a good 10 days. And they get to feel the discomfort of not being the majority or not knowing exactly the language. We have them try to learn the customs prior to going. That's to create a value for something different and to learn that you can't do it the way you've done it here and expect it to always go well. So learn what's acceptable there. But I think that's a big deal. And that's more than what you're learning. It's not a class. It's not for credit. It's meant to change your life and your perspective and give you like a worldview instead of just the ethnocentric view that many people have when they haven't traveled abroad. There are a lot of ways to approach it.
I want to make a quick comment about that. I'm writing a book on class bias, and I interview people from different backgrounds and different experiences. And that was the #1 thing that came up. If you want to be diverse and understand from different perspectives, you need to travel. And every single person who had rose from a specific area of class said that they either traveled earlier, they did a study abroad program. Most of them traveled earlier, did a study abroad program, which changed their trajectory and experience and perception. And I'll say I'm a part of that at St. Bonaventure. I'm going to be going to Oxford soon. So I'm really excited about that. So yes, I agree. I concur.
I just want to say thank you so much we had so much excitement in the chat. And I think that this is a wonderful beginning to a conversation that I can see very clearly a lot of people want to continue to have this conversation, to continue to build from the things you're talking about today, I think will be really great. So there are several of you who have really brought up a lot of great ideas and things, and maybe there's an opportunity for a panel or a further discussion or something to that nature. To continue to build from what we're talking about here. And the same with students and so forth. We really appreciate you taking on tackling this big topic, and we have to keep at it, right?
Lots of great stuff in the chat function. I just wanted to, I don't know who it was, someone said, maybe we can have someone support students to get their passport, because even that in some cases is a challenge. And I'm not going to lie, when I first got my passport, it took me 2 years, not because it really takes 2 years. It's because confidence, where am I going to go? Where am I going to go? And then actually getting there. So I love the comments here. Love the comments.
Well, Dr. James, if you don't have anything else, I do want to thank everyone. I do think that talking about the systems you know, there's strategies and goals, but you got to have systems in place to move belonging. And I think that's a really excellent point for us all to leave with, which is, you know, what are all the ways and all of the barriers to creating belonging, the small things and the big things that we need to be doing. So great food for thought, a wonderful presentation, and wonderful participation. Thank you all for joining us, and thank you, CJ, for a great.
Absolutely. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, CJ. Thank you, faculty and students, for joining us. And you're going to be the energy and the engine behind this new culture that we are creating. So I was really pleased to see all of the comments and suggestions about what we can do and where we can go next. Kimberly and I will talk about it. I like the suggestion of having a conversation about it at the beginning of the school year. Maybe we'll even have summer chats, but I think we are the ones, we're the change agents. So it's time for us to make those moves. And thank you, CJ, for sharing your ideas and really re-energizing us. Thanks for coming.
Yes, thanks, everyone.
Have a great day.
You too.